The next one. Next slide. Okay. Tonight we have an event which ticks every modern trending theme. We will hear from the co-founders of Rebalance Earth about their global ecosystem services platform using blockchain technology. Vivi Hugh from Harvard Business School will interview the co-founders about the business proposition and the key business drivers to the success of such a social enterprise. This will be followed by Q&A. The Joint Alumni Forum is a social responsibility committee of the Harvard Club of Switzerland and cooperation with the alumni clubs in Switzerland of Harvard, Oxford, Cambridge, Stanford, and Yale. It's a forum for education and discussion on various themes encompassing social responsibility, including equality themes, human rights, environment, and sustainability. Our aim is to trigger thoughts, which trigger actions, which triggers impact. Our venue sponsor for this evening is Impact Hub Viaduct, and they are a community of innovators creating a radically creative world. So a big thank you to Impact Hub. Our virtual sponsors this evening is Crypto Valley Association, a leading voice in the global blockchain ecosystem, specializing on regulatory, legal, and taxation topics. A big thank you to both of our sponsors. I want to thank also the 170 people who registered for this event for their interest in this topic. I'd like to thank also the Joint Alumni Forum Committee who helped today with the setup. I'd like to thank Interim Legal for their support of this event and UBS colleagues and former Credit Suisse colleagues who are supporting this event, many friends who are here supporting this event, and Benny. Now, let's get the show on the road. Can you switch to Ian, please? Next slide. Yep. So can we see Ian? Okay, our first speaker this evening is Ian Redmond. Ian is a wildlife biologist and one of the co-founders at Rebalance Earth. Over the past 45 years, Ian has devoted his life to the study and protection of gorillas, apes, elephants, and other endangered species. We'll hear from Ian this evening about the role that these keystone species in the forest play to sequester and store carbon, which is the basis of the Rebalance Earth carbon offsetting mechanism. Ian has served as an ambassador for the UN's Convention on Migratory Species, chairman of the Ape Alliance, UN Great Ape Survival Partnership, senior wildlife consultant for the Born Free Foundation. He's a writer, a lecturer, photographer, and broadcaster, and he has helped make more than 100 documentaries. It's a real pleasure to have Ian speak about the animals he protects and the role these animals play at Rebalance Earth. Okay, over to you, Ian.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Diane. I'm flattered to be invited to speak to such a distinguished gathering. I'm sorry I'm not in the room with you, but by the wonders of modern technology, I'm coming to you from Stroud in Gloucestershire, despite the appearance behind me of a family of gorillas. And I put those on the screen behind me because I had the good fortune 46 years ago now to go and study them and to live in the forest in a little cabin and go out each day and sit, as I am doing now, surrounded by gorillas. And as a biologist, collect data on their daily activities. And you can see just from the couple of minutes of video behind me that they have an impact on the vegetation. And at first glance, that looks like quite a destructive impact. They tamp down and flatten a lot of the vegetation that they don't eat. And during a rest period, when the adults rest, but the kids don't rest, they play, there's a lot of destruction, a lot of breaking off of branches. And as the film cycles behind me, you'll see that lobelia stem gets a good thrashing from a juvenile gorilla. And that impact is fascinating to an ecologist. And we were aware that the gorillas were shaping their own environment. by the way they harvest different plants. They're very selective feeders. They look for the food plants that they learned about when they were a child in their mother's lap, how to prepare the edible part of each plant and eat it. And they produce voluminous quantities of dung every day, which of course fertilizes the forest. And if they've been feeding on fruit, as well as leaves and stems and roots, then those fruit seeds are often transported in the gut of the gorilla. And there goes the lobelia stem, and deposited miles from the parent plant, wrapped in a nice little package of dung, which of course compost down to fertilizer, first-class organic manure. So they are both shaping and fertilizing and effectively gardening the forest. Their feeding behavior prunes the trees, and they are a keystone species in that if they disappeared from the forest which evolved with them, then that forest would change dramatically, as all the things that they used to do are not done, and different plants grow at different levels, and all the species that were perhaps dependent on the trees that the gorillas seed dispersed would change. And then in 1980, I got the equally good fortune to go and study these guys. Now, I don't have a video of this, but these are the famous underground elephants of Mount Elgon. Elephants that go deep into the dark zone of caves. And here again, you see how a mega herbivore, elephants of course are the largest terrestrial animal, shape their environment, not just by the plants that they push over and the leaves they eat and this manure they produce. You know, if gorillas are gardeners of the forest, elephants have been described as mega gardeners of the forest. And these particular elephants satisfy their appetite for salt by going deep into the dark zone of caves. And both the gorillas and the elephants, you can find, if you want to find out more about them, go to a website called Ecotourism, V for virtual, ecotourism.org, and you can take a tour and find out. But let me, for the moment, switch to the focus of the Rebalance Earth initiative, which at the moment is focusing on forest elephants. Now, forest elephants in Africa are now considered to be a different species to those on the savannah. They're quite different in their behavior. They're much more frugivorous, partly because there's a lot more fruit in those forests. And what during these years of study to find out about the animals, the scientists doing that had not, I think, paid enough attention to what the animals did to the forest. And it's in 2019 that a paper was published by an Italian biologist called Fabio Berzaghi, who's our chief scientist at Rebalance Earth. And he concluded that in forests in the Congo Basin, where they still have forest elephants playing their role as mega gardeners, there's actually 7% more above ground biomass than there is where the elephants have been extirpated perhaps decades ago. So you lose elephants from the forest, you don't just lose elephants and all the species that are ecologically dependent on those elephants, and therefore you get a drop in biodiversity, you actually lose biomass. And that's because elephants like to eat and trample and utilize the small plants, the herbaceous plants and the small trees that are growing up in clearings, and then produce dung at a rate of about 1 metric ton per elephant per week. So that's a lot of, let's keep it polite, a lot of fecal matter fertilizing the forest. And it turns out that what it fertilizes is the big mature trees that don't get trampled by elephants. And that's where most of the carbon is stored. That's where the carbon sequestration and storage is most effective. So elephants are enhancing the forest ecosystem's ability to provide one of the most important ecosystem services that society now recognizes. And that in our desire to reduce overall greenhouse gas emissions and increase the amount of carbon sequestration and storage, elephants are our allies. And Fabio had the good sense, having read a paper by Ralph Sharmy, who I hope is going to be our next speaker, to send him his paper and say, okay, if whales are worth $2 million each because of their enhanced ecosystem services, what are elephants worth? And Ralph did the sums, he'll tell you all about it. And it's on that model that the presence or absence of a keystone species makes a measurable difference to the efficiency of a forest. And Walid will explain how he can bring this concept to fruition in a transparent and trusted way using blockchain, and how we'll use artificial intelligence to hopefully eventually recognize individual elephants. Initially, it's going to be dependent on skilled observers, but we're moving towards a system whereby we can monitor elephants in the forest and know that our client elephants, who are like the workers in the life support system factory of the planet, know that each individual client elephant is alive and well and doing his or her job. And it's an extraordinary concept that we couldn't begin to put into practice even 5 or 10 years ago, let alone when I started 45 years ago. So to be a part of this team that is putting this concept into practice is for me beyond exciting, because the one lesson I've learned during these past 45 years is that populations of almost every keystone species are declining. And one of the reasons for the decline is not only the human pressures on their habitat and the actual pressures on the animals being killed for their tusks in the case of elephants, or for their meat, or for whatever body parts some human thinks is valuable for money. That valuing of dead nature has to be replaced with the valuing of living nature. And that if you can do that within the global economy, not the philanthropic sector, I'm the trustee of several charities trying to protect elephants and apes, and we are constantly asking people at the end of the month, if you've got a few spare quid or dollars or yen or whatever currency, please help us protect them. That's not sustainable. Ecotourism has been a huge boost for the mountain gorillas, but then there's a pandemic or a civil war, tourism stops. And so does much of the conservation work. We need a source of finance that is pandemic proof and terrorism proof and actually helps the planet. And that's what we're looking at tonight. So that's enough for my introduction. I'm the warm-up act. I hope you enjoyed that. I'll be around for questions later if you want to ask. Over to our next speaker, or to Diane.
Okay.
Sorry, we can't hear you, Diane. You have unmuted yourself, I think. I mean, you have muted the microphone on the table.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, perfect. Thank you.
All right. Apologies, people, for the technology issues. I'm going to start again. Okay, so our next speaker is Ralph Chamy. Ralph is Assistant Director at International Monetary Fund, where he served for 24 years. At the IMF, Ralph was head of regional surveillance in many countries, mission chief for fragile states. What's really, really special is that in 2019, Ralph was involved in the IMF research on how whales have been saving humanity from climate change. Ralph is co-founder at Rebalance Earth and has had discussions with the governments in 12 countries regarding the Rebalance Earth nature-based paradigm, which these governments are watching from the sidelines how the pilot in Gabon, Africa works. Ralph's been traveling all over the world preaching this paradigm. I've heard Ralph speak several times on this new economic theory, valuing nature. It's the second time that he's been willing to speak for the Joint Alumni Forum. It's a great pleasure to have Ralph, the world traveler, here in Zurich to speak with us. So I suggest you come here.
Perfect. Okay, wonderful. Thank you all for coming. Thank you, Diane. Thank you for the Joint Alumni Group. It's a pleasure to be here. I just flew in from, I think I'm a bit jet lagged, well, from Mallorca, where we were talking to Deutsche Bank and the Ocean Resilience Group about the value of living and thriving nature. Can we go back to the first slide? This is, So what I want to do, rather than talk about rebalance, is talk about the paradigm that underpins rebalance. There we go. Okay. Can we put it in present? Perfect. Thank you very much. Okay, so what I want to talk about is a new paradigm of economics that values a living and thriving nature. Because the current paradigm that we practice, I'm a professional economist. I used to be also a professor of economics. And the paradigm that we currently practice puts a zero value on a living and thriving nature. For example, if I were to ask you tonight, what is the price of a fish? Most likely what occurs to your mind is the price of a fish on your plate served at a restaurant. What I'm really talking about is what is the price? What is the value of a living and thriving fish in the ocean? There is a value, you just don't know what it is. What is the price of a living and thriving elephant? There isn't one, except if you attach it to tourism. But what if I were to tell you, forget tourism, the elephants do an incredible job living and thriving and frolicking freely in the forest? What is the price of a living and thriving whale? Unfortunately, it's zero. Because right now, if a ship were to hit a whale, skewer it on the bow of the ship, and sail into any harbor, there is no penalty. So the current system puts a value of zero on a living and thriving whale. That's where I started the work based on this, trying to basically show that really the value of a living and thriving whale, aside from the intrinsic value of nature itself, we all have an intrinsic value. But aside from that, from a purely ecosystem services value to humanity, these living and thriving nature, or flora and fauna, have an incredible value to us. And with that observation, I went with a bunch of friends of mine to develop a whole new paradigm of how we can live for tomorrow. So let's see if I can convince you. So when we want to start with this, why are we even talking about this? Because, next slide, please. Because right now, humanity, we're all concerned with climate risk. Everybody's talking about climate risk or climate change risk, but in reality, we are facing two risks. They're happening simultaneously. One is climate risk, of course, but together with it is risk of the death of nature itself and the loss of biodiversity. If you've ever listened to Sir David Attenborough, he's not talking about climate risk, he's talking about the risk to nature itself and the loss of nature itself. These two risks are linked together by human activity. It's the human activity that's precipitating in the loss of nature and its functions and its biodiversity, which is boomeranging back to us in terms of climate risk, and they're feeding off on each other. So when we are faced with these two risks, either one of them were to happen, if either one of these risks were to materialize, it'll be basically the end of humanity itself as we know it. So which means we cannot fix one risk and then fix the other. There's no time. Every report that you can read now tells you there is no time. If we were to reduce the climate calamity, we also have to deal with reducing the risk of the risk to nature and the loss of biodiversity. So how are we going to do this? Well, when we identified the climate risk, the world decided that the way to fight climate change risk is through the reduction in our emissions of CO2 or CO2 equivalent gases. The IPCC report, the latest one that came out a few months ago, tells you that nature can deliver 40% of that, which means we already have a plan of action. If we were to invest in nature, reducing the risk to nature, protect nature, restore nature, rejuvenate nature, the scientists would tell you nature can boomerang back by helping us to reduce the carbon in the atmosphere by at least 38%. So that's the plan of action. Next slide, please. Okay, so this is a natural solution to the climate. Okay, we go through nature. By protecting restoring, rejuvenating nature. Not only do we reduce the risk to nature, but we also, by going through the natural system can help reduce climate change by 38%. That's what the science is saying. So that's the plan of action. The question is, how are we going to materialize that? It's one thing to talk about it, it's another to put it into action. I'm talking about investing in nature. I'm not talking about philanthropic giving to nature. Philanthropy is great, altruism is great, but that's why we have a financing gap. Because all the proselytizing that we've tried with people telling them the beauty of nature, the intrinsic beauty of nature, has not stopped us from killing nature. So is there something else we can do that in addition to philanthropy, in addition to altruism, that can help us save nature, thereby helping to save ourselves? So this is what tonight is a proposition of how we can do this from an investment point of view. Okay, so let's see how. So the first question, is nature investable? That is the question. Beyond altruism, beyond philanthropy. And what I want to prove to you is indeed it is. And when I talk about nature, I'm not talking about killing nature, I'm talking about a living nature is worth a lot of money, if you like. Next slide, please. This is work that we have done recently for the United Nations, UNEP, and Greta Rondo. We were tasked with finding out what is the value of the carbon sequestration of seagrass globally. Would you believe that it's $3 trillion? And that actually is a minimum. And hopefully in the Q&A, you would ask me how we do so. Right? So seagrass, salt marsh, mangroves, these are what is called coastal blue carbon. And because people, when you think of carbon sequestration, everybody thinks about trees. But everybody forgets that 4/5 of the planet is water. And the coastal blue carbon, especially seagrass, absorbs even more carbon and stores it far longer than trees do. After all, they don't burn, as we're finding out with forest fires now. And if you don't disturb them, that carbon stays in the sediments forever. But seagrass, salt marsh, mangroves, kelp forests, wetlands, they're also great defense against flooding. We can also calculate what is the economic value that we get from the flood control, and you would add another $1.5 trillion. If you go to the website of the Great Barrier Reefs, and if you go for Australia, the scientists there have documented the positive relationship between healthy seagrass and fish stocks. And if you know some econometrics, you can run the regressions yourself and find out that there's an incredible relationship between healthy seagrass and healthy fish stocks. And healthy seagrass also have a knock-on effect on coral reefs. So seagrass is not only helping us as an ally in terms of fighting climate change by grabbing carbon, but it's also great defense against flooding and in terms of food security. These are what we call ecosystem services beyond just the climate risk aspect or reducing the climate risk. Next, please. This is for the coral reefs because people ask me about the coral reefs. Coral reefs do not capture carbon. They are at best carbon neutral, but they do a lot of other things that are incredibly important in terms of defense against flooding, in terms of the fish stocks themselves, ecosystem services, the food for the fish. This is the latest estimate from the IPCC that basically says the revenue from coral reefs is at least $36 billion a year. That's in flow. Next, please. Now, this is interesting. When you say capture carbon, everybody thinks about trees or they think about flora, trees or plants. But this is work of Andy Pershing of 2010, Joe Rome in 2014, Laver in 2015, and so on. These scientists discovered that whales in the water capture so much carbon on their body. These are the great whales, the 9 species, and they're negatively buoyant. So when they die, they actually sink because they're so heavy. And anything that sinks below 1,000 meters is pretty much sequestered for life, unless we humans come and disturb through dredging, through mining, through all kinds of things, and that carbon goes bellowing back up into the atmosphere. But these whales, so how much carbon do they capture on their body? Roughly on average, 9 tons of carbon. You multiply that by 11/3, that becomes 33 tons of carbon dioxide being kept out of the atmosphere on the body of a single whale. If you want to visualize that, that's the work of 1,500 trees. But the whales do a lot more than that. Those great whales have a huge appetite. They like to eat krill. And krill likes to eat phytoplankton. Phytoplankton captures so much carbon dioxide from the atmosphere, equivalent to 4 Amazon forests a year. Phytoplankton are microscopic organisms that float in the water. They grab in carbon dioxide between 23% and 30%, and in return, they give out oxygen. So the whale eats the krill. The krill, like, think of a triangle in your head. The base is the whale eating a krill. The next arm of the triangle is the krill eats the phyto or the zooplankton and the phytoplankton. And now we're going to link the phytoplankton to the whale. How? Well, the phytoplankton to survive needs phosphorus, nitrogen, and the limiting factor is iron. And guess where they find all these 3 nutrients? You haven't had dinner yet. Good. In the poop of the whale. So these whales, there's actually, if you like to read science or journal or the Nature journal, 3 months ago, there was a very nice article about how much these whales like to eat, and which means how much they defecate. So they eat, so now you get the virtuous cycle. The whales eat krill, the krill eats phyto, the phyto needs iron, especially in the Southern Ocean, where there's no runoff from rivers or movement of wind over land. The whales are the fertilizers. So they eat a lot, they poop a lot, they fertilize the phyto, more krill, more food. They're very smart. But for our purposes, when you fertilize phyto, you're grabbing more carbon dioxide from the atmosphere. So the whale, through the carbon on their body and through the way they fertilize the phyto, when you calculate how much does one whale contribute in terms of carbon sequestration, turns out to be at least equivalent to thousands of trees. Now, what is the value? You can calculate the value of carbon sequestration by a whale. How do you know? How do we do that? Well, if you go right now and Google EU ETS, the price of a ton of carbon is $100. When I did the study, what is it? My goodness, it's now 4 years ago, time passes. Okay, the price of carbon was $24. Today, it's $100. So minimum, the value, this is not the value of a whale, this is the value of the service of the whale, meaning what is the net, what's the discounted present value of the lifetime earnings of a whale from capturing carbon? Like this sentence, let me make it simpler. I work for the IMF, they pay me a salary. What would be the salary that you'd pay this whale for capturing carbon on our behalf? Same, they're working for free. But if they were to speak, they say, why don't you pay me, man? I'm saving you. How much is it worth? $3 million in today's money. That's basically it. Okay, next, please. All right, this is the orphan. I call this the orphan. This is the part of the ocean that belongs to nobody. This is IPCC report, okay? So every country, think of a circle and all of the countries of the world around that circle. Every country can claim about 200 miles, that's your zone, but beyond that is the open ocean. It's an orphan, it belongs to nobody and therefore belongs to everybody. That ocean, since we started collecting data, which is 1870 till today, has grabbed 500 gigatons of carbon dioxide. That's IPCC report from below 1,000 meters. Now, it doesn't take a genius to say, this is a stock, not a flow. What is the value of that stock? $30 trillion. Meaning, if the ocean could speak, it would charge us that amount of money for having captured all that carbon quietly, silently, as long as we don't dredge it, as long as we don't mine it. Because once we do that, you disturb that carbon, all of that carbon is going to go bellowing back up into the atmosphere. If you'd like to know on flow basis, we can calculate that because the scientists have the equation. If you look at the IPCC report, they have the stock equation. For those of you that are mathematically inclined, you differentiate it, you get the flow. And once you have the flow, you figure out that on flow basis, present value over 100 years is another $30 trillion. This is the ocean quietly saving us. Next, please. Next, please. All right. So the elephants, as my colleague Ian was saying, elephants are frolicking. These are the forest elephants frolicking in the Congo Basin. This is work of Fabio Berzaghi and colleagues published in the Nature Journal 2019. There they discovered what Ian was describing to you, how the way they walk, the way they feed, they increase carbon sequestration in the forests of Africa between 7 and 14%, depending on their concentration per square kilometer. So as long as you have between 0.5 elephant to 1 elephant per square kilometer, their contribution is positive. If there are more of them per square kilometer, their contribution could be 0 or negative, meaning they start to destroy the vegetation. So if you look at their study, they show you the optimum concentration of elephant per square kilometer. So what we did with Fabio, we asked the question, how much would you pay that elephant for her services over her lifetime? How would you calculate it? Well, think of a share of stock that pays you dividends over the lifetime, except that these are dividends that give birth to dividends. And you have to keep track of the overlapping generations, and you build a population growth model, and then you follow that till it tapers off. It's a logistic curve, and you discount it to the present, and what you get is a minimum. The expected discounted present value of the lifetime earnings is $2.3 million. This is just in carbon sequestration. But the elephants, as my colleague Ian was saying, do a lot more than that. So is nature investable? This is a living and thriving nature. The answer is, of course it is. Now the question is, how are we going to make it realistic? How are we going to take it to the markets? So science tells us nature is valuable. We can come around and translate that science into dollars and cents. So we can bring it to people like us that are not scientists, at least those among us, and to policymakers who suddenly, when they hear dollars and cents, they wake up. And the question is, but what do you do with that number? What can I do with it? Next, please. Okay, so biodiversity, basically, it's not flora and fauna. It's not blue and green. It's all of the above. Nature is incredibly, as nature is a regenerative nature, is incredibly valuable to us. We know it intrinsically, but this is in ecosystem services to humanity. Next, please. So what I'm really defining for you is the new wealth. This is not old wealth. This is new wealth. Okay, this is a new class of assets. But the finance people among us here know that an asset does not necessarily end up on your balance sheet. For it to end up on a balance sheet, it needs to be codified in the law. Then it becomes capital. Capital is an asset, and with the law allowing you to put it on your balance sheet. Once it enters your balance sheet, it changes your net worth, and then the game is afoot. So what is needed? The third pillar, you have the science is the first pillar, you have the monetization is the second pillar, the third pillar is the legal framing of all of this. Next, please. So this is for the lawyers among you here. We need the legal framework. We need to know, what is our relationship with nature? Should nature have its own personhood like you and me? Okay. Should we criminalize any action that will hurt nature? Or is nature just an input into an output that serves our interests? Who can speak on behalf of nature? Who has the right to speak on behalf of nature? These are all issues, by the way, that are hotly debated right now as I speak to you by so many different groups. So many great minds are writing on this. What is the relationship between us and nature? Okay, next, please. So if we're talking about the ocean, well, obviously just like land or ocean, ocean is a living system. Ocean is a living system. with its flora and fauna, and we need to treat it as such if we are to continue to depend on it to continue to look after us, basically. And we need a new definition of our relation. We need to, change our mindset of how we deal with the ocean. We should think of the value of a fish, of a living and thriving fish, of living and thriving whales or dolphins or whatever it is in the water. Next, please. This is some examples of countries that have gone ahead and redefined the relationship with nature. New Zealand stands out because New Zealand conferred personhood on the river. Can you imagine? A river in New Zealand has as much rights as you and me. It's a legal entity, it's a legal person. And so you have legal responsibility towards it. Costa Rica realized that bees are incredibly important for their pollination, so they conferred personhood on bees. And many other countries, I know that the Chileans, I work with them, the draft, which unfortunately did not pass the voting by the citizens, the article number 8 redefined the relationship between citizens and nature, basically giving rights to nature. So once we have the science, we have the valuation, we have the legal framework, then we can think about how do we create a market or we develop an economy around a living and thriving nature. Next, please. Here we go. So if you're interested, so how do we do this? I get this question all the time. How do we go to the markets? Well, on the left-hand side is the supply of nature. So I'm going to make it simpler, I'm just going to think about the carbon market. Bear with me, but I could be talking about the biodiversity market if you like. Okay, so supply, it's countries, communities, or indigenous people that have ownership, that they can certify that they can speak on behalf of nature, be it a forest, be it an elephant, be it whales, be it mangrove, seagrass, salt marsh, what have you. What is it that they ought to do? The first thing is you need to do an accounting. What is it that you have? I get calls from countries saying, where do we start? I said, the first thing is to do an accounting. What is it that you have? A scientific accounting. Do I have mangroves? Do I have seagrass? Do I have salt marshes? How much? How little? Right? Next thing is you need to do the market valuation of it. Underscore market valuation. The third is, as I just said, is the legal aspect. Who can speak on behalf of nature? For example, if it's seagrass, let's take the case of Bahamas. Bahamas is sitting on 10% of the seagrass globally. That seagrass belongs to the government, to the country. So that's easy. So that's on their balance sheet. Once you give it the market value, it comes on their balance sheet. Once it comes on their balance sheet, their net worth changes, their rating changes. Their debt sustainability changes. Their fiscal stance changes. It's a game changer. More importantly, from a market perspective, now go to the demand side, who is going to be interested in buying the carbon sequestration of seagrass? Well, all these companies that came out and said, we're great citizens of this world, we've committed to go carbon zero, carbon negative, carbon neutral, correct? Microsoft, and on and on and on. Countries and companies, they've all committed to do something by reducing their emissions and offsetting the carbon. And these are two separate things, by the way. Okay, these are the ones, this is where the demand is coming from. So the demand for carbon sequestration or carbon offsets or carbon reduction is from all these companies and countries that came out and made these statements. They are now, that's why the price is 100. I track the price of carbon. It started at 0 at the Kyoto protocols. Once the Kyoto protocols came online, price ecked up. Once you get to Paris Accord, the price took off. The price today, if you go, is over $100. By next year, it'll be in the hundreds of dollars. Which is not, why? Because people made commitments to go carbon neutral by 2050 or 2040 or 2030. But when we made commitments to go carbon neutral by 2050, that was predicated on actions we were supposed to take at that point in time. And we didn't do anything, we just talked. So that 2050 became 2040, and we still continued to yap and talk. And that became 2030, which means the urgency is building up, which means the demand for any technology can truly sequester carbon is skyrocketing. That's why the price is eking up, because of the urgency of it. So those on the supply side are the countries that have abundance of nature, but such that what I'm advocating is a market. Look at the principles in the middle, very important, that the countries never sell their asset. This is not about an asset sale. This is about leasing your asset, leasing the services of your asset. Why? Because it's very important that indigenous people and local communities maintain ownership of their asset. And what you're really doing is just basically you're paying nature what it deserves. So the money has to come back from the sale of the carbon to look after the asset in perpetuity and to look after the local communities and indigenous people in perpetuity. Next, please. I'm running out of time. So these are issues that are coming to the fore. How do we ensure equity, Ralph? I get this question all the time. How? And I say equity towards whom? Equity towards the local population. I say, yeah, but it's not enough. We need equity towards nature itself, because nature has the right to exist just like you and me. So the principles that I talked about protect nature, because the money that changes hands has to come back to look after nature in perpetuity, and has to look after the people, the stewards of nature in perpetuity. This is how we deal with intragenerational and intergenerational. It's almost like you create a sovereign wealth fund, but for nature, where it's an endowment. The income from it goes to look after the people and nature in perpetuity. Next, please. The issue of transparency, I will leave to Walid, because that's his area of expertise. But we can deal with transparency. Why is that important? Because remember, from a market development point of view, from a financial market development point of view, there are always these issues of asymmetric information, gold rush behavior, double counting, triple counting, all this stuff. How are you going to deal with it? In the past, may have been very difficult, but now we have the technology to deal with it. So Walid will expand on this. This is his area of expertise. And once we do all of that, next slide. There's the last slide. I call it the win-win-win model. Actually, it's 4 wins, but I got tired saying win-win-win. So I stopped that way. Why is it the win-win-win? In this new world of ours, no one is a loser. This is not a win-lose proposition the way we were trained, the way I taught my students. It's not, because this world, nature wins because the money comes back to look after nature. The local communities win because they are the ones going to be benefiting by design, not by happenstance, by design. Who else will benefit from it? The governments. The governments of Bahama, can you imagine 10% of 3 trillion? How much? That fiscal balance of theirs will change dramatically. More importantly, the economy will be diversified away from tourism, depending only on tourism or on the sale of or using extractive services. You're generating a new income that is acyclical, doesn't depend on a business cycle, and has nothing to do with whether we get another COVID or not. What does the buyer, if you're on the buyer side, you want to say, why should I come into this market, Ralph? I say, well, you're a company, you're looking for a raison d'etre in a new world. You want to be a good citizen of the world. Your sustainability officer is telling you, we're being asked by our investors, by the regulators, by our employees, by our consumers, what are you doing for nature? What are you doing for the environment? And the answer is, not only am I offsetting my carbon footprint, enhancing my ESG score, but I'm also alleviating poverty, creating resilience in nature, creating resilience in the people. So you're hitting your SDGs, Sustainable Development Goals, 1, 3, 8, 10, if I still remember, 13, 14, 15. Everybody is a winner in this world. This is what I talk about. This is sustainable development, sustainable and shared development. And it, by design, is nature positive. Thank you.
Thank you, Ralph. It was really, I've heard him talk about 5 times about his new economic theory, and I never get tired of it. Now, our final speaker is Walid Al-Sakaf. Waleed is the founder of InsureBlocks, a dedicated weekly podcast on blockchain, smart contracts, and DLT. InsureBlocks helps viewers to understand the basics of blockchain and also hear about proof of concepts, where enterprises and startups have done. Waleed has been involved in the setup and running of numerous startups and is also involved in several blockchain and supply chain enterprises. Waleed is co-founder and CEO of Rebalance Earth. I'll let him talk a little bit about how he pulled everyone together to form Rebalance Earth. Waleed manages the efforts of 60 volunteers in 10 countries. It's a pleasure to have Waleed as speaker and to hear the how about the use of blockchain and cryptocurrency in this ecosystem services platform. So I'm going to hand over to you, Waleed.
Thank you, Diane. It's a pleasure to be here with all of you. Sorry I couldn't be there in person. It's funny hearing about InsureBlocks. I wish I was doing a little bit more still in blogs, but Rebalance Earth is all consuming because the need and the urgency of what we're trying to do is just so imminent. Now, you've heard through our co-founders, you heard through Ian Redmond, the essential value proposition that forest elephants have and how they become an investable asset because of the value of the ecosystem services. You've heard through Ralph, about his economic paradigm and how, if you want his guidebook on how we can start valuing those services and how we can bring them to the market. Rebalance Earth effectively represents a case study on how this can be done. And I'm going to be explaining to you more of the blockchain element that we bring to this trio between the three of us. So what is Rebalance Earth? Well, first of all, it's a global ecosystem services platform for valuing and funding a living nature to combat climate change, protect biodiversity, and to lift communities out of poverty. We don't believe in siloed solutions that only focus on carbon. If you want to face the essential threats we're dealing with, you need to face climate change, biodiversity, and human welfare all at the same time. And the way we do it is that we effectively give businesses a way to employ one of those forest elephants. So that forest elephant you see in that image could effectively be your biodiversity stroke carbon contractor that is here to do the work on behalf of your company to provide that boost in the forest in terms of carbon sequestration and of course also in enriching the biodiversity. And by buying those credits, you can be supporting the local communities and hitting 8 of the United Nations SDGs all at the same time. And this is, if you want, is from a very high level, our secret sauce. The way it works is that you have on the left-hand side, you have the buyers, whether they're households, corporates, or the capital markets who can purchase those ecosystem services credits. Credits are valued at $40. And that price point was validated through a survey that EY, our strategic partners, who conducted it with 23 of the largest corporates around the world across 8 different industries to find out how much would they be willing to pay for an unverified carbon credit, unverified biodiversity credit on a proposition of the type of rebalance, and it's $40. That $40 goes to pay the park rangers, to protect the elephant from the poachers, but the majority of that fund actually goes to, in the form of micro investments, to support the local communities, whether it's providing free healthcare, job creation, and also investing in local women for them to build their own businesses, because there's a correlation between the health of a society and the educational and financial empowerment of women. So that's how the funds are used. Now, those credits are produced every day that one of our smart sensors in the forest, I'm talking about motion activity camera traps, acoustic sensors, DNA testing of the dung, and where relevant and where available, I should say, if some elephants have already been colored, we will leverage that data. When one of those sensors can prove that a unique elephant is alive on that day, we produce a credit of $40. The creation of that credit, The purchase of that credit, the distribution of those funds is all tracked, traced in a transferable manner on an R3 enterprise Corda blockchain. Now, as to why we choose R3 Corda. It is a private blockchain, and that gives it some advantages. In one sense, it is one around consumption. For those of you who are in the crypto world, you are familiar that Bitcoin consumes 125 million joules of electricity per transaction. Ethereum before the merge was 17 million. Now it's, I believe, it's about 170,000. So it's a lot more energy efficient, but as energy efficient as an R3 Corda, because a transaction on Corda is 24 joules. So just 25, i.e. less than the cost of an email. Also is used by most financial institutions and by central banks around the world, such as Bank. So this is a bank grade solution, and Rebalance Earth, we need was governments and institutions around the world, and we needed a solution like that. In the spring, in Corda 5.0, that will be interoperable with blockchains such as Ethereum, such as Cardano, all which we're very excited to integrate in the future. So this is the blockchain. What does it mean for the end user? So this is an idea of what the data can look like for our first client, Co-Founders. So it will show how much carbon has been offset through the platform. It will demonstrate an example of how we transfer clients' carbon dollars for social good. So an example of the school that is being purchased. But the most powerful tab is you see their tokens. You can see for every single, these are the suite of elephants that have produced an ecosystem services token for you on that day. And you can actually click on that token and be able to see on the camera traps the picture or the video of the elephant that produced that token, providing you that undeniable truth that that elephant was live on that day and that you are the sole owner of that token. In turn, you can also see where have the funding gone to. You can see it's gone to pay Audrey, the park ranger. Audrey's paid, she's protecting her elephants. She's doing 17 DNA tests. She's intercepted 3 poachers. We have all the data. We can surface it times so that they can see that the money has not gone into some kind of government black hole budget, which God knows where it goes. Here, we can track everything down to the penny. But we believe that as Rebalance Earth, you go far alone. You have to go far together, and that's this African. Great believers in that. We have to work with a number of stakeholders. Coming back to a question that was Q&A by Tall Tutis, you have to work with local stakeholders on the ground. You need to be able to work with a grand coalition of partners because we cannot do it on our own, and we want to also support a wider ecosystem. So what do I mean by that? So we are launching, Africa with the forest elephant as our keystone species pilot, if you want. But we want to be able to do our solution to other keystone species, such as the great apes, and who knows, perhaps a rhinoceros. As we start expanding the platform to cover other species, then we flexed our cycle so that we can enable it for other countries around the world with their own keystone species, as long as we follow our rigorous science model. It enables us to have a kind of a science or a keystone marketplace so that clients can choose which key they wish to have in terms of their portfolio of keystones that they want to support. With regards to sensors, well, a lot of the conservation groups on the ground already have sensors. So for every picture they give us of a keystone that is on our platform, we will pay them up to $1 for that picture, that video. Effectively, we're creating a distributed network of sensors. The data we have, the more robust our platform is in the eyes of our clients. But of course, we are now supporting conservation groups by funding the data that they give us. All of this data that we accumulate, we will standardize it, and we will distribute it for free on an open basis to the science, to further understand the value those keystone species can also understand biodiversity. And this is key. We are very cognizant of the role we have to play by supporting science all around the world. But the thing is, you can also extend the platform in terms of helping it to develop new business models. What do I mean by that? So let's simplify it a little bit. So we have this distributed network of servers. And if you want, they provide us the data for kind of a science-based business logic smart contract. If you want to say this elephant was alive, produce a Rebalance Earth. And that in turn activates, if you want, kind of a business smart contract that says, okay, make a payment to that park ranger, make a payment now to fund that school. All that being tracked on a Corda blockchain. As you grow this platform and it becomes international, you an governance oversight body, to manage all this. And that's why Earth will have a seat on that governance oversight body. The national governments in which we interact will have a seat. Local communities will have a seat, but also global institutions such as the World Bank or WWF and Greenpeace and so on will have a seat on this governance oversight body. And if you take all this and you wrap it all around, then it again opens up opportunities, because in the community operating in, we're going to be providing digitization to them, because we need our sensors to connect themselves to our blockchain over the air through mobile networks. This community platform can also be extended to the local community, get them access to digital services. The data that I was telling you that we will have standardized and clean will be given for free for the scientific community, but it can also be used for the business, for insurance companies, to help them to be able to have better risk models, to understand the risk of certain locations. Identity, we're going to be effectively creating digital identities for those, but also identities for local communities as we give them digital wallets and we give them a pass, bankable. And of course, as this market grows, you're going to have increased liquidity, which can be collateralized. All this can be used in so many different ways. And one of those examples is paramount insurance. This is what I mean in terms of extending our platform for new business models. You have cases where elephants come and destroy farmers' property. They come in because they're hungry, they're coming to self-medicate. It can take 6 months for those farmers to get compensation from their government when the elephant destroys their farm. By leveraging our blockchain, by leveraging our platform, our sensor, then we can offer companies the ability to offer parametric insurance to farmers, where they can say, yes, the sensor has detected that elephant going into that farm, and thus we get a payout of X amount of dollars to the farmer within 24 hours. So that is another aspect that if you start really opening up the layers of the onion with Rebalance Earth, you start seeing how numerous different applications can be built on top of this infrastructure that we've built. But now I just want to cover a little bit more about what it means from a biodiversity aspect and mapping out a little bit more. So let's just take a step back and let's remind ourselves, what is the Rebalance Earth engine? Because fundamentally, it's about a keystone species that provides us an eco-credit. And that eco-credit provides liquidity, which we can use to invest in sensors, that provides us data, and that is given to the scientific community. That science helps us to unlock other keystone species, such as the orangutans and the giraffes and so on. But that liquidity also goes to support the local communities for them to act as the stewards, the guardians of those keystone species, to protect them and for them to be able to grow in numbers. Of course, tracked on an Corda blockchain for the transfer and trust. Now, if you take that, you can start mapping out the services, the LI. So the elephant helps to maintain the forest, which is good for the smaller herbivores. He also digs small water holes, which is good for other species. When the elephant dies, other species live off the corpse of that elephant by feeding on it. And of course, the dung that Ian was talking about, helps to sustain the forest in terms of dispersal agent. And our brothers, the chimps, likes to eat the seeds that is left in that dung. But there's also the aspect that the elephant as it moves on disturbs a lot of the insects, and that has an opportunity for the birds to eat them. The elephant does it day in, day out for free. With Rebalance, we can start mapping these things out and understanding the value, is that value being transferred. And once you start understanding the value, you can start then jumping to the other species that are related with them, whether it's the chimps, whether it is the small herbivores, whether it is or other big cats. And as they start mapping these things out, then this ecosystem services token can be an asset that can provide the investor of the tradable asset with a carbon credit, a biodiversity, and what else is an ESG credit in terms of support they can provide to the local communities. All of this, we argue at Rebalance Earth, is really setting out the cornerstone of what could be, the future in terms of a regenerative economy, on an economy that is based on regenerative nature, not one that is based on a dead nature. So we invite you to join us in this endeavor. Rebalance Earth, as Diana said, is run by a large team of volunteers. We've been working on this day in and day out, but we're always on the lookout for new volunteers who want to help take this pilot to production grade solution. So feel free to reach out to us either through or on LinkedIn, and we would love to have this conversation with you. Thank you very much. Over to you, Diane.
All right, thank you very much, Walid. Now we're going to have a little bit of an interview by Vivi Hugh. Vivi Hugh will give the Rebalance Earth founders a Harvard Business School grilling. And there are two reasons I wanted her to do this. One, I wanted the viewers to understand this is not just another startup with a save the world idea. It's a solid business case, and it's a pilot for future business propositions using blockchain technology, which is being used as a pilot now for at least 11 countries, okay? I also have to admit I'm conflicted. I do pro bono work for Rebalance Earth, and I would give a rose-colored view. I want you guys to think about some questions for the co-founders about, do you think this fusion of blockchain and ESG works? And what's your opinion on other aspects of their business model? Okay, so put your thinking caps on, think of some challenging questions. Now I'll just say a few words about Vivi. Vivi was interviewed by NZZ, claiming her experience and capability as the best candidate for board member. Vivi is a venture investor focusing on the technology sector. She's a member of the board of directors of Zur Rose Group, a Swiss-listed online pharmacy and healthcare ecosystem builder. Vivi previously worked at eBay, McKinsey, Citic Capital, and is a founder of various businesses. So I think she is very, very qualified to give these guys a HBS grilling. So please come over here.
First of all, I would like to thank for the great presentations. I feel today is a little bit surreal for me. While Ian with the gorilla in the background feels like I'm watching a movie. He's this kind of type that you always see in documentary instead of in real world. And Ralph, you asked this question, was very enlightening. What is the economic value of a fish? And I was thinking about, okay, buying co-op, how much it cost for a salmon? This very new way of thinking and monetizing what nature is offering us, I think is amazing. And what's interesting, Vali then talk about the whole business case and building an ecosystem, how we use blockchain technology to actually make it happen. So my first question is, actually, how does Ian hang out with gorillas and elephants met you too. And then how do you start the ideation of this concept? How does it coming from the needs of protecting nature and animals to provide an economic value of the whole thing? And then think about the business model using blockchain of selling it. I think this is a question for lots of young people and startups. Like, how did you come to the fruition, you know, like to put together a business case?
How much time do you have? Okay, very quickly. 2017, I ended up, I'm a mission chief. I was a mission chief for fragile states. And I was just tired from, the work on fragile states is very tired. And so I was confiding in a friend that I wanted to do something different. She said, "What are you interested in?" I said, "I'd like to see a blue whale." I wanted to be an oceanographer when I was a kid, and my father said, so I had to wait 40 years. And it turns out that she was part of a team that studies the blue whales in the Sea of Cortez in the Baja on the Mexican side. And she said, "Let me talk to the skipper." So the skipper called me up and said, "Do you know how to swim?" "Yes." "Do you know how to dive?" "Yes." "Do you get seasick?" "No." "Can you come out?" I said, that's it. He said, "Yeah, that's pretty much it. We have one opening, one cancellation." Anyway, but I know nothing about whales, nothing. I'm not an environmental economist. I'm a financial economist by training. So I went to Baja and I'm on the boat with these. First of all, I met my first time I was out on the boat, I met the blue whale. Now you have to understand what it means to meet a blue whale. It's the largest creature that ever lived, bigger than the biggest dinosaur you can ever imagine. So she was about 110 foot long. And she surfaced next to our boat, which was 25 foot long. And I have the videos of that day. You cannot, there is an iota of a soul inside of you, you're like, what is this? And she's feeding next to us peacefully. And she knew we were there because she went under the boat, around the boat. By the way, to understand how big is a blue whale, you can pick the largest African elephant and it will fit inside her mouth. Forget the rest of the body. Okay, that's what we're talking about. She turns on her side, opens her mouth, gulps in all that water. And then she doesn't have teeth. She has baleen. These are baleen whales. And the water gushes out. She traps the krill. So you're telling me how this started. The scientists were. I had nothing to add to the conversation. We're all drinking wine at night after a long day, 11 hours on the boat, and they're saying that the whales are dying. And I know nothing about whales. And one of them made a mistake of saying whales capture carbon. My first degree is in physics. So I said, we're all carbon units. And then they said, really, Ralph? I think you have the same amount of carbon as the whale. So then I said, well, how much does a whale have carbon? They said, go read the papers. So the idea was, I'm sitting at the IMF. The IMF still is very much involved in the climate issues and what's happening and pricing of carbon. So I got this idea. I thought, well, if I know how much the whale is capturing in carbon, I can tell the world the value of the whale that's providing to us. Because obviously telling people that the whale are beautiful creatures, we should protect people, say, yeah, I know. How much money do you want from me? And then you wait for Christmas or something to ask for money, and people say, well, yeah, but I'm giving for the bonobos, I'm giving for the cheetahs, and this philanthropy had reached the limit. So I wanted to talk to people of my own guild, the finance people. And I've done policy at the IMF for 24 years with policymakers. I know how they think. I figured if I can take the value from the science, translate it into language of dollars and cents, people would suddenly say, wait a minute. It wasn't about valuing a whale. It was just saying, this is one service that the whale does. How much would you pay her if she could tell you, pay me? And that's how it started. So then Waleed, I was interviewing a lot of people and doing a podcast. I ended up on his podcast. And he says, oh, this is very interesting. I've never heard of this before. Do you know Ian Redmond? I said, I know of Ian Redmond. Who doesn't? And he said, how about if we get together? So it was Waleed's idea. I'll let him finish that story
Okay.
of how we ended up a conservationist, well-known, with a blockchain person, with a financial economist, kind of getting together. And the idea, can you go beyond the philanthropy model?
Yeah.
Okay. And can you make a value proposition that is serious enough that people would actually say, okay, this is worth, doing.
So I think you mentioned what is amazing. I think a human mind need sort of put a dollar sign before we can really capture and imagine how big is the value, right? So I think maybe a follow-up question for Walid is how you actually turn this, put on blockchain technology and turn into spreadsheets. Especially the business model. You say you are building an ecosystem. I think it took hundreds of billions and many, many years for Amazon to build a platform business, a marketplace. And what is the plan, the business plan for rebalancing Earth to put up such a complicated ecosystem in a way, having nature monetized in carbon value, having the corporate clients buying into it. And of course, there's a pre-assumption that there's a legal and law supporting the governments are on board. How do you plan to do that, especially in number form? Like how large is the business you're imagining? And especially I heard you're not a social enterprise, you actually is a business with a social purpose. So that's a different ballgame than any nonprofit or charity foundations. So how do you plan to do that?
Thank you. It's with a lot of pain. It's incredibly difficult what we're trying to do, but let's play with the Amazon analogy. So Amazon didn't launch straight away a marketplace. It started off by selling books, and it did that really well before it started expanding in other species, other products. So we, like Amazon, we will start selling the ecosystem services that a forest elephant can provide, and we're pricing it only related to the carbon side. We all know biodiversity is valuable, and we all know biodiversity is becoming a standard where, just like Ralph mentioned the Kyoto Protocol for the carbon markets, we're now at the stage of the Kyoto Protocol for the biodiversity. So that's how early of the stage are. So we're focusing on one keystone species, valuing on the carbon, proving the model, and then expanding it to cover other species, and using the funds that we acquire through a transactional fee that we charge for every credit that we sell to invest in the science to be able to unlock that biodiversity. And coming back to this ecosystem, it's something that we do with other partners. So for example, one of the firms we've partnered with is called Nature Metrics. So they're specialists in terms of understanding the value of biodiversity. So the kind of capabilities that we want to be able to plug in. In terms of who we are as a company, we kind of sit in between the NGO world and the corporate and the limited world, because very often limited companies who want to do something of a similar mission as we do will become B Corp certified. Now, and that's wonderful, because they invest a significant percentage of their profits into achieving their mission. The trouble, in my opinion, for a B Corp is that if Google comes around and acquires you, they can change the rules of the game if you want. So we needed a different kind of legal entity. And there is one in the UK, which is called a community interest company. So what does that mean? It means that we have to invest our profit to achieve our mission. It also means we cannot be acquired. We cannot be listed on the stock market. Our asset is locked. It's protected. What this ensures is that the funds are always used to achieve our mission's objective, to service our community being the local communities in which we interact with, but also the global community, whether it's the animals, whether it is nature itself, whether it is humans. That's the community we're here to serve. So having our asset locked protects us from ever being acquired. It ensures that we stay true to our mission. We can't hear you.
now?
Yes, I can hear you now. Thank you.
If I can allow me to push a little bit the other economic part of it. You mentioned you get a fee basically the credit your transaction on your platform. Can you tell us what $1, for example, transaction looks like, how much fee you're getting, and how much is rest going actually to the elephant and to the nature, and what are the administration burn or churn that lost in between?
Sure. So for every $40 that we sell, and again, all this depends on a number of factors, but let's say the happy case scenario, okay, is that we at the beginning 20% cut of that $40. That 20% is to cover our operational costs. It's also to use to in the science for us to unlock the other values in the biodiversity. So we're left with 80%. Out of that, 5% will go to pay the park rangers' salaries. Remaining 75% will be determined with the local communities on how those funds are to be distributed to fulfill their health requirements, their educational requirements, and perhaps in development requirements. We have to be very sensitive in terms of how this is distributed, because we need to be the North telling the South what to do and how to do it. But equally, we have to recognize that our corporate, have ESG objectives. So they want to make sure that the funds go usually into health or educational related purposes. So 20% goes to Rebalance, and 8% goes to the local park rangers. So the park rangers are directly responsible for the protection of the elephant. And the remaining of those funds, the 75%, is fees, and it's here to reduce the human-wildlife conflict. Because a farmer, you can now take your daughter or your son to a local health clinic where the healthcare is free because it's provided for by your local elephant. And that will hopefully act as a disincentive for the farmer to pull a gun to shoot the elephant when the elephant goes to their farmland. I hope that answers your question.
And I could add to that, if I can jump in, that it would also mean that the community has a fund to put in place whatever is needed to reduce that human-elephant conflict, which is very often simply an electric fence or a fence with beehives strung across it. And that sounds like a nice idea, but somebody has to be able to afford the wire hawser to hang the beehives on. Somebody has to afford the labor and the means to do that. And instead of constantly having a handout to a charity saying, please help us, we haven't got any money and we're suffering from elephants, they'll say, well, we'll just go into the community fund and be able to purchase those things. And it will affect the illegal wildlife trade too, because populations of keystone species are currently valued by organized criminal gangs who also smuggle drugs or guns or people. But the penalties for, if you're caught smuggling wildlife, whether it's live baby chimps or dead bits of animals like ivory, are relatively small. So the enforcement is weak and the judiciary haven't really got the idea that these animals are important. If Ralph's proposal that these are declared national assets comes about, the governments will take it seriously if someone comes and destroys that national asset. And the local community, who are often implicated in some way in the organized criminal gangs, they need labor, they need intelligence, they need somewhere to store the illicit goods until they can organize transport. If some bad guy comes into a bar and buys a few beers for some strong lads who look likely candidates for carrying tusks, for example, and the strong lads who are unemployed say, how much are you going to pay us? And they say, oh, I don't know, $50 a day. That would be a lot to a young unemployed man in Central Africa. But if he knows that his elephants are earning $40 a day each in perpetuity, then his attitude to that potential bit of extra money will change. And hopefully those strong lads will be employed as elephant monitors or helping to solve the human-wildlife conflict, for which there will be money that is not a result of passing the hat round at church halls in England or America to try and raise money for the charities. And as I say, I'm a trustee of several charities. That's a really important stay to help protect animals, but it hasn't yet worked at a scale, except perhaps for the mountain gorillas. And the success of mountain gorilla conservation can be largely attributed to the fact that people are prepared to pay a lot of money to spend an hour sitting near a family of mountain gorillas. At the moment in Rwanda, that price is $1,500 for a ticket that allows you 1 hour to sit with a family of gorillas. And what happened 3 years ago, or 2.5 years ago, when the pandemic struck? Travel stopped. That income stopped. So we see tourism as sort of the icing on the cake, but we're valuing the cake itself. And that's the difference. If a tourist comes, that's extra money. But the value of these species and what they do in their habitat has not been recognized before. And at a time where we are facing these existential threats of ecosystem breakdown as a result of biodiversity loss and fragmentation and destruction of nature, and climate change, which is exacerbating the biodiversity loss, to realize that the biodiversity is actually key to preventing climate change, to stabilizing our climate. If we can restore the populations of whales and elephants, and as someone was asking in the chat, in the question, rhinos and other keystone species, so that those ecosystems are working at optimum level, not in the fragmented and degraded way that they are now, then we solve all those problems and we have a healthier world. And I think Rebalance Earth, we still have to set up the proof of concept pilot project, but we're about to do that. And once we've shown that it can work, I think we'll expand geographically and taxonomically to other species and other countries and make this work, following the Amazon example that Walid said. He might start off selling books, might start off selling ecosystem services developments, but very soon we hope it will be a global marketplace that, as Ralph says, values a living nature.
Follow up on that line. So trust is always a big problem on ecosystem, right? Especially, for example, part of your supply is actually government. And lots of these oceans or animals are actually less developed countries, and the government might not be, I would say, so transparent, or like could be 100% trusted. And what I'm hearing from Ian is actually those fundraising, in a way, people are selling credit, right? Are not necessarily just government. Those are activities defined by the caretakers, by the people who are related to the conservatory. Can you elaborate a little more on that? Because
Sure.
I think the validity of the business model
Sure.
is also related to how trustworthy it is.
Sure. So on the European ETS, if you Google it tonight, you can Google it on your iPhone today, price of carbon, ton of carbon is over $100. If I am a country in Africa and I have the same carbon, I will never get $100. I know the cases, maximum you're going to get $10. Why? Carbon is carbon. Why should I, if I'm Gabon or Cameroon and I have a UNFCCC carbon, each certified carbon, why won't you pay me the same amount that is paid among European countries when they trade their carbon? The typical, and this is not hearsay, this is from the source, is that the answer is given is that we do not trust your governance. We are not going to give you the $100 so that your minister in some country X builds another villa in Canada. So how do you solve this problem? You have a problem of lack of trust. You have a problem of asymmetric information problems, distance. And so that's why there are two propositions that I put up for you here. One is what the proposition from the seller is. You're worried about what? People always forget when they're on the supply side, they forget the demand side, and they're on the demand side, they don't realize what's going on with the supply. So let's look at it from whoever's going to buy it. Let's pick a company, Google. Google says, okay, I like this proposition. but hey, Ralph, I'm going to put on my website that I'm offsetting my carbon footprint. So I need someone to verify that is indeed that's happening. 2, I'm going to say that I'm creating resilience in the forest, that the elephants are alive, that the money is going to the conservation. I need to know this, and that the money doesn't end up in the coffers of the government. Why? And why is Google worried about that? Because some investigative reporter is going to fly out of the US, fly into that country and say nothing of the sort. That money is going into the same old, the communities are getting nothing, the elephants nobody cares about. That's the reality of the situation. So how do you deal with it? Well, the first thing is, what Walid was describing is the blockchain. When blockchain was designed, was never designed with the idea that it's a governance mechanism. That's a new function that we've discovered that blockchain can serve. Because what it does, it says, listen, all the contracts are going to come on the blockchain. And you can see, Google can see exactly who's getting what, who is buying what. There's no double counting here. More importantly, I've been in development for 30 years of my life. The communities have been shortchanged forever. So the communities themselves, when you go there and you proselytize a new product, they look at you like, we've heard that before, we're going to get nothing. But when you design the blockchain, the smart contract, they are going to be the ones basically involved in the design of the contract to suit their situation. Because the situation in Gabon is not the same situation in Cameroon, is not the same thing in Ivory Coast, and so forth. So the blockchain resolves the issue of transparency. Now, how would you contract that? That you contracted ex ante with the government before you enter. It's not done ex post. You say, if we are going to do this, you have to agree to this blockchain. That's one. Next part is, well, how do we know that the money is going to look after nature in perpetuity? How we go? Well, this is, I have experience as a mission chief dealing with oil funds in many countries. How do you do it? Well, you create a trust fund. The money, you sell whatever, let's say you say $4 billion worth of carbon certificates. They enter a trust fund. That trust fund is invested, just like an endowment. Think of it as a sovereign wealth fund. Sovereign wealth fund is on the balance sheet of the government, but how the money is doled out is under very strict rules. So why is that important? Because the country needs to understand. Now think of if I'm the Minister of Finance, whose money is this? I'm going to say it is your money. The stock comes on your balance sheet. It's a stock concept. Changes your ratings, changes your net worth, changes your debt sustainability. But what we're talking about here is the flow of the funds. That is under very strict rules. And the governance of it is going to be by people who are not involved in all of this, such that when we say the money is going to look after the elephants in perpetuity, the money is indeed. Why is that important? But because Google is worried about this minister may be eco-friendly. The next minister may say, hey, that was his deal or her deal. I'm not beholden to this. That can happen. That does happen. So how do you solve that problem? By putting it under very strict governance rules on the flow of funds. And this is what we have in the design that I was showing you. You agree on all of this ex ante, not ex post. So you solve the issue of commitment or pre-commitment, or what we call in economics time inconsistency. And you solve the issue of asymmetry of information through the blockchain technology. And then you go to the north, the global north, and say, can I get the $100? What is left? Why? Because the other reason, if we don't do that, it's not only about rebalance. The problem is much bigger. If some countries get 100, some countries the price is cheaper. Yeah. Think of the polluters. Where do you think they're going to go? The cheaper.
Market arbitrage.
So they're going to, and it's called legal arbitraging. They're going to go to the countries where the price is low, and they're going to pocket the profits and socialize the cost. And pollution is a global bad. It's not a local bad. It's a global bad. So we need to have one price to avoid arbitrage by the polluters. We need to have one definition of what is natural capital. We cannot have different definitions because companies, polluters will arbitrage among us so that they can pocket the difference. So beyond what Rebalance is doing is saying, here's a proposition, deals with transparency, deals with commitment, in addition to philanthropy and all that stuff. And the other thing is, what we probably, and Ian can best speak to this, is these elephants are given 10 years. They're on the endangered list. We are not, people always ask me, why are you guys doing this? I said, I wouldn't be doing this if nature was doing great. We wouldn't be here. Nature is dying as we speak. And right now, if we don't protect those elephants, there's a proposition that says, kill the elephant, you get $30,000, that's the price of their tusk. So there's a counter argument out there saying, kill them. So unless I come up with a way that says, beyond the philanthropy, the 30,000 is pure commercial. So I need to have commercial motivation that says, no, a living elephant is worth $2 million. Why would you want to kill it? What Ian was trying to tell you is the poachers ask the villagers, where are the elephants?
Yeah.
And the villagers see no reason for a living elephant, because a living elephant right now traipses on their farmland. So what this does is says the farmer, the villager starts saying, wait a minute, this living elephant is giving me $40 a day, giving me pride, stabilizing me in my land. Why would I want to kill it for a mere $5 that I'm going to get from, because no one gets the 30,000 except the ivory trader.
Yeah.
So it's a purely value proposition. It's not based on philanthropy. It's not based on altruism.
Yeah. I think in a way it lasts longer, right? It's more sustainable.
It's by design. By design.
And I like the idea the money actually goes onto the balance sheet, but actually it's already in account payable to the elephant.
Voila. I love that. Can I use it?
Yeah, sure. So Diane's suggesting, should we open Q&A? I do have one question, which I think is very interesting.
I was gonna say, through the chat. Yeah, through the chat, we got a lot of feedback that the virtual viewers' questions have already been answered. And all the physical people here will be able to ask questions of Ralph, not of Ian and Walid. So I'm going to propose you do one last question, and then we'll do the Q&A physically over drinks, if that's okay with everyone.
So one last question. I think the key for the success of a venture is also the team, right? I think Diane's been volunteering, and I heard that there was at maximum there was 60 volunteers. But is this sustainable model? You always rely on volunteers, and how do you plan to fund it? I mean, there's two dimensions. First of all, how do you plan to fund it long term? Are you going to do tokenization on blockchain? And the second, how you manage an organization in a way is very virtual, right? It's like existing all around the world on different mandates. The operation side of it. Maybe you can speak on that part, the funding and also the team management.
That Walid would have been best, because I'm not involved in the day-to-day of the, but yes, it's an asset-backed security. I'm a financial engineer by training. So it's an asset-backed security, and you're never selling the asset, ever. You're selling the services of the asset. Yes, so I look at tokens as one aspect of that. The nice thing about it is what people don't realize, the world is highly indebted. You don't want to add more debt. This is one way that governments could get the revenue, right? And when you look at, I mean, if you allow me to segue into sort of what I hear about blue bond, green bond, debt for nature swap. To me, I worked in this area. This is same old, same old. What this is saying is completely different. Take any of these instruments that you like, green bond, blue bond, or if you like a debt for nature swap. What does it say? You lend me money at a discount so that I can look after nature, correct? One form or another. That's basically what the blue bond or green bond is for. But what we're doing here is something much more than that. The nature that I'm looking after itself is generating revenue. Now, we need to restructure that as that for nature swap. because who's going to get that revenue? Me, the borrower, you. Or maybe I don't even need to borrow from you at all, because I can sell the services of my nature and fund myself. So there's a very nice thing from the tokenization aspect. It moves you, it diversifies your funding, if you like. It conserves cash because it's not debt.
It moves you from the fiat currency.
Exactly. Exactly. Now on we have 60 wonderful volunteers, and we want to bring them all on board once we have funding in different capacities. And there's an equity component to all of this. Everybody should have equity in the firm and stuff. So Walid has all that worked out in terms of, but it's tough because these people have jobs.
Yeah, maybe Walid can talk about how do you manage 60 people virtually? How do you build a team, a culture in a way?
Challenging, but also it is possible, and we have demonstrated how to do it. The thing is, culture comes, with time. It comes with a lot of offline interactions, right? So here we were limited to the online because we attract people from all kinds of different worlds, from academia, from science backgrounds, from conservation background institutions, corporate startups, all kinds of backgrounds, and 90 to 95% of us had never met physically. We all met during COVID through Zoom, WhatsApp, and team calls. So there's different little things we do. Some of them you can call them gimmicks, but we created ourselves like a Spotify playlist. Like we all contributed ourselves together in terms, what was the playlist of Rebalance Earth. We started, of course, organizing each of the teams of the volunteers into 12 different groups. Each working group had 2 coordinators, and those coordinators would meet every Mondays at 5:30 UK time for our sprint agile call, where we had targets that had to be to hit on a weekly basis. So every team leader, coordinator, had to report on 3 things. What were you working on last week? What are you working on this week? And what was your blocker? So that we could resolve that. Now, as we matured as an organization, of course, the number of volunteers, the number would flex. It would go up and down because, as Ralph said, we all have full-time jobs, and no matter how passionate you are about rebalance, it doesn't quite pay the bills just yet. So we've managed to onboard a lot of new people. We have lost a few along the way, and some of these have also come back. But I believe we have a strong culture between us that we have managed to establish online. We have had the opportunity to meet up face-to-face from time to time. I had the pleasure of seeing Ralph last week, for example, in Geneva. Ian is a little bit closer to home, so it's a little bit easier to see him. I was hoping, to meet up with Kathy, who is part of the executive team, in Africa later this year. So it is possible to build a cohesive team as long as you align yourself on around a set of values and you organize yourselves in terms of working groups with some clear deliverables of what needs to be achieved. And as long as you can have that momentum, it gives faith in the organization that we can deliver on this proposition. And we can hear you.
Diane's going to say something.
All right. It's been a really, really interesting, wonderful evening. It would have been lovely to have a lot more questions. You did a fantastic job, Vivi. And I would like to thank our 3 speakers, Ralph, Ian, Walid, and of course, our interviewer, Vivi. I'd like to thank everyone for your interest, all the virtual viewers, all the physical people here. I am going to give Crypto Valley Association a chance to say just a couple of words, call to action. So I'm going to invite Dennis up, and he'll give just a couple of words, a call to action for a blueprint, which we're doing for Rebalance Earth.
Yes, thank you, Diane. Don't take you too long from the drinks. We at Crypto Valley Association, we of course picked up that topic as well. As an association, it is our objective to bring new ideas, new concepts in the blockchain area forward. And we are actually very pleased that we started as well a blueprint work. So we would invite people that are interested to work with us in doing a blueprint to explain to the broader public how are we doing these kind of ecosystems based on blockchain technology. So if you're interested to participate in that one, catch up with me at the drinks and we can chat how such a introduction or collaboration or participation in that blueprint from the Crypto Valley Association can be happen. So thanks, Diane.
So we'll give a round of applause. It's time for drinks. Bye.
Thank you. Thank you very much, guys. Bye-bye.